the national level that actually began before the Texas initiative, and that's being coordinated through the National Institute of Justice with the Forensic Lab Needs Technical Working Group. And that's a heat map exercise to identify pressure points for standards implementation across all of the disciplines across the U.S. So I think we'll have a hotspot of data here in Texas that will really complement that larger picture at the national level. And hopefully that will allow labs to, policymakers to identify where those resources need to go to help forensic science service providers. So it's all very exciting.
You know, I'm glad you mentioned the heat map exercise, because I think for the labs who are here with us, you know, if we observe that everyone is implementing, except there's this one section of this one standard that nobody is implementing, that's important information that we need to know. And then the question becomes, okay, what is it about that? And we can feed that information back up to OSAC, to NIST, and we can, maybe we say, well, maybe they can come to us and say, well, if we had these things, we could implement. But if the answer is, if we all had new instrumentation to the tune of, you know, $200,000 per instrument, I don't know that we can help with that, but one could see how that information would be helpful in talking with funding sources, in talking with the legislature, in talking with the feds. So yeah, I'm really excited about all of this, and I think it would be great to have those slides on our website.
No problem, thanks.
I have a question.
Yes.
Oh, go ahead.
We're live now. Okay. We're live. Tell them they can go back on. And hopefully that won't have any ill impact if they do. We're live now. Okay.
Quick question. When we're talking about this, you know, having these standards there that we know if the labs are following them, if they're not following them, will the rank and file scientists, say in seized drugs or in DNA, know the rationales as to why the labs are following or not following this? Because I could see a situation where a person who's there who's just doing the casework gets asked a question that is, for lack of a better word, above their pay grade. Are they going to be taught those rationales?
That's a great question, Jarvis. Thoughts from the audience? Anyone want to comment on that?
Nobody's volunteering right now.
Training piece to that.
Okay.
Be constantly ensure that our folks that are out there testifying understand
Okay.
what we're obligating the department to, and that's for the department. So that you've identified that is something, but we're aware of that.
I think that's the advantage of the free training that's available, Jarvis, because the training that's available on demand through this cooperative agreement with NIST makes it very easy for a forensic science service provider to provide access to new or existing employees on an update on a standard, whether it's for seized drugs, ASTM 2329, or a DNA standard published by ASB. So we're trying to make it easier so that each lab doesn't have to develop its own training related to standards, and that there is one place that you go for all of these resources. And it's being heavily utilized by the labs at the moment. So, and we're about to embark on our third year of this cooperative agreement with NIST, so it's very exciting.
And I gave a talk at Rusty Duncan recently, thanks to Mark, who invited me. And I talked about this a little bit there to try to make people aware that there are these national standards out there, and they should start looking at this information. My guess is that it'll take some time for people to think about that as someplace they go when they're preparing a case. And I think the same thing will be true for TDCAA as well. But we do need to get out there and talk about this, because there's a great opportunity, I think, for lawyers to develop a better understanding of the operation of forensic science laboratories. And I understand it's daunting when you hear all these letters and numbers And don't look at the glass standards because it'll make your head split. Like, it's not even in English practically. But if you have a case where your most probative information is about glass, right? You should know that there's a glass standard out there, and you may not be able to understand what it says, but that would be a reason to ask for an expert, right? So to help you understand the implications of it, whether the lab has implemented it, and so forth. So, yeah. I don't have anything else on administrative. Lee, do you have anything else? Okay.
All right, then the next thing will be item number 4, Mr. Daniels.
Thank you, Dr. Bernard. We have 14 disclosures today, 1 complaint, then 4 matters handled by our staff. Our Complaints Disclosures Committee did not meet yesterday, as we've done sometimes in the past, because of the lack of complexity of some of the matters before us. And it's amazing this committee is so efficient when they don't even meet. They're that good. It's incredible, yeah. But and I always want to thank our staff for their very thorough work, and they get all the pertinent information, and they ask every relevant question. It makes our job very easy. So our first matter is item number 23.07. It's from Fort Worth PD Crime Lab on seized drugs. It involves a mathematical input error on a botanical marijuana sample on a proficiency test. And Garcia had advised me prior to the meeting there needs to be a little more work done by Doctors Kerrigan and Drake concerning some technical issues. And without going into extensive discussion, it might be appropriate just to table that at this time. If there aren't any questions or comments, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion, and will make that in the form of a motion.
I just wanted to let people know that from the last meeting where we were asking some questions about this disclosure based on issues that Dr. Kerrigan and Dr. Drake identified, we sent those questions in writing to the laboratory and included the accrediting body. And they looked at the questions and they came back, and also the labs said to ANAB, you looked at our validation for quantitating Delta 9 THC in plant material. Can you confirm that with the commission? And the response from ANAB was, yes, we did. The commission's questions are raising some questions for me. And so now they've gone back and forth asking for more information and more data, and the lab had to get the vendor to come in and pull some of the data from the instrument, which they just did very recently, like within the last couple of days. So ANAB is really taking the lead on much of the inquiry, and Dr. Kerrigan and Dr. Drake have received all of the information, but we feel it's important to let that dialogue finish before we do anything. I will also say that they have an assessment coming up, and there was the intention to add liquids and edibles. That is a far more complex undertaking than for plants. So really these issues need to be discussed and worked through before that happens. And surely, if I've misstated anything, Dr. Kerrigan or Dr. Drake, feel free to fill in. But that was why we wanted to, we don't like to table things, but when we really do truly have outstanding technical conversation, and when the accrediting body is part of that conversation, we think it's important to give it the time it deserves.
You move that as a motion.
Make that motion that we table this item.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
This brings us to our second matter. It's item 22.18 from the City of Austin Forensic Science Department, Firearms and Tool Marks section. The lab had discovered a PowerPoint presentation be utilized in a trajectory conclusion for a detective investigating a case, and the lab found some of the analysis in question. They actually set about to set up a special investigative unit to review the matter. We really don't have enough information right now to complete all this. We're waiting additional information. Staff made a recommendation that we table this pending additional information and completion of a root cause analysis. If there aren't any questions or comments, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion that we table this matter.
Any discussion?
I would just add to that in the disclosure, The issue that is brought to our attention is that a PowerPoint was shared with a detective prematurely before tech and admin review. But in the disclosure, it also talks about underlying technical issues, presumably with the competence and performance of the analyst. But it does not describe what those are. And in my mind, those are really the things that we need to understand. So we've gone back to the lab and asked them to please spell out for us what the issues are and how they were resolved. And then once we get a more detailed disclosure explanation, I think we'll have a better time being able to understand what happened and evaluate it. The analyst has reached out to us to talk to us, to give us her perspective. So we'll also need to speak with her between now and the next meeting too.
All right. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
This brings us to our third item. It's 22.19. It concerns the University of North Texas Health Science Center, Center for Human Identification. It might be appropriate if Dr. Cole will recuse himself this matter.
Yes, sir, thank you. I wish to recuse myself.
Good. And the center had disclosed an incident out of its forensic biology section where a CODIS population stats software in the lab was used to calculate mitochondrial DNA. It was not performing as expected in certain circumstances. It centered around an insertion site of 315. It was initially discovered there while preparing a discovery packet with regard to a criminal case. The analyst noticed errors in the mitochondrial stats for 2 questioned hairs. The lab previously reported different stats for the 2 hairs, 2A and 2B, even though the profiles were essentially the same. And the analyst determined the software was used to calculate the statistics most likely caused the issue. Although they had discovered the issue at a specific insertion site 315, the lab is now aware the issue may not be limited just to that insertion site and may be affecting others. And this means the issue may extend to other CODIS searches of mitochondrial DNA for the lab's missing persons casework. As far as corrective action, the lab has reviewed all its mitochondrial DNA cases, both missing persons and forensic cases. The lab identified 3 cases under that category. They also recalculated the statistics for all 3 of those cases, and they also issued amended reports. As far as stakeholder notification, they notified the attorneys for the specific case and also provided a copy of the amended report. The corrective action for the lab is still open and ongoing. It will remain open until all additional guidance and software updates are provided to FBI. Staff had reviewed this matter carefully, investigated it, provided us more than adequate information. They had brought forth an initial recommendation that we took no further action given the root cause analysis and all the corrective action. If there is any additional information that comes to the Commission as far as additional developments based on the information provided to FBI, then we'll be updated accordingly. But with that being said, if there aren't any questions or comments, I'll make a motion to take no further action at this time.
I would just like to add that UNT has heard from the FBI in the last few days, and they are preparing a patch on the software issue, and they will also issue a bulletin describing the issue. Obviously, not all labs have mitochondrial DNA analysis, so this is really a UNT thing for Texas, because we don't have any other mito labs, I don't think. And so we will put the bulletin in front of the Commission, but I don't think there's a reason to extend this further because it's really the FBI's issue, which I love to say that out loud. You know I love to say that. It's really the FBI's issue.
All right, is there,
Motion on the floor.
yeah. Is there any other discussion? Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The motion carries.
Our fourth matter is item 23.24. It comes out of the Houston Forensic Science Center seized drug unit. The lab had disclosed an incident where they discovered drug samples in 18 marijuana cases were analyzed using an incorrect sample vial. and subsequently improperly reported to the submitting agencies. An analyst discovered the problem back in March after reviewing batch data for suspected marijuana samples. It centered around the injections for 2 of the samples in the batch that were made from the incorrect sample vial. In their case review, they conducted an audit, and they went back 6 months. They found that each 11 batches run between November and March of 2023 included 2 sample injections from the incorrect vial, for a total of 22 samples concerning 18 cases. They did reanalysis, and all the results agreed with the previously reported results. The lab issued amended reports with an explanatory comment. The lab also noticed all the prosecutor's offices and all law enforcement of the corrective action. As far as root cause, the lab attributed the cause to a decision point assay workflow by not having independent visual verification to check the manual logbook entries into the sequence table log and the sample vial location corresponding with each other. The lack of that verification in combination with the analyst general practice, quite frankly, contributed to the problem. As far as corrective action, all decision point assay gas chromatograph batch sequences that were run after the discovery of the issue, including reanalysis, it will now be verified by a second person, will be documented. It appears they've done everything they can do to review this and correct it. Staff had brought forth a recommendation of taking no further action, which I concur with. There aren't any comments or questions. I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion.
Any further discussion?
I had a question about this one, because this one really relates to just setting up the sequence log. As I understand it, it's completely independent of the analytical procedure itself. So when HFSC did the corrective action on this, I think they just, in our documents, it said that they went back and looked at the sequence logs for this particular assay. But is it possible that this issue related to entering the sequence log, entering the information on the cases, could apply to other assays, or is it very specific to that one? But most importantly, I wanted to point out this is a sequence log issue, not an analytical issue.
Correct, yeah. Peter Stout, Houston Forensic Science Center. This is very specific to the marijuana assay because it's the only assay that we do in there that we do in batches. So everything else they're appending it on to existing runs that are going on. This is the only one that we do in batches. So it's unusual for analysts in there of this batch that for a toxicologist it would be straightforward. For a seized drugs person, it's a very different thing.
Great. I just wanted to clarify that. Thank you.
Motion on the floor.
So moved to table.
Wait a minute.
Need a second. I said I'm prepared to make a motion, but I didn't actually make it.
Okay. All right, is there a motion?
There is.
Okay.
To-
All right, is there a second?
Not to table, take no further action. I'm
Right.
sorry. I'm sorry.
Can you repeat the motion, Mr. Daniel? I'm sorry, we just want to be clear.
I misstated initially. I meant to say a motion to take no further action given the root cause analysis and corrective action.
And was there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our fifth matter. It's item 23.25 from DPS CODIS unit. An incident in the lab discovered a stack of 12 database cards in the office of the former technical leader. The program coordinator researched the cards and discovered from back in 17 sequential swab envelopes associated with the cards that were flagged as being missing. The lab believes the swab envelopes were separated from the database cards and were entered into the laboratory information management system, but the samples simply weren't processed or the profiles developed. They determined it's possible the bundle was placed maybe in the trash during cleaning of the lab area. The procedure did not include a verification step requiring technicians to account for the number of samples before sending them to the next step. The lab did notify all affected agencies. They attempted to retrieve new samples. They've updated their standard operating procedure back in 2018, some 5 years ago, to require a verification step in the CODIS collection triage process, which ensures a database card from every sample, that the cards are not missing. It appears that the lab had done everything they can to, one, research this and also correct it. Staff had reviewed the matter carefully and brought forth a recommendation based on all the facts and circumstances that we take no further action. And if there aren't any questions or comments, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion.
I did want to add something, which is that I spoke with DPS. When I reviewed this, it struck me that there probably should have been a quality incident done at the time. And they agreed that there should have been one done at the time. But this individual has moved on, so it's hard to be able to ascertain why they didn't do it at the time. I don't know if you all have any that.
No, I mean, we believe. You're starting to trend here. Brady Mills, Texas Department of Public Safety. We believe, since we're contacting local agencies to try to get cards or new additional samples, that takes time. And I think the time that it took to do that outreach to our client base caused this matter to kind of get lost in the shuffle of some employees leaving. We have obtained 8 of the samples, so 8 of the samples were tested, and those individuals are in CODIS. And then the 4 other ones we weren't able to obtain. Either they're not under supervision anymore, or they are deceased. So the original question was, should we have done a write-up on this? We agree. At this point, since it has been 5 years, we're going to add some supplemental language to another corrective action that we did in CODIS, but then kind of leave it at that.
Good.
All right. Any further discussion?
I'll formalize that in the form of a motion.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next matter, it's item 23.26 from NMS Labs, seized drug unit. The lab up in DFW discovered back in March a package that had been received. 2 items from the internal package, which originally had 3 items in it, were missing. The 2 missing items were vape pen cartridges. DPS had notified the Texas Rangers. They were investigating the matter. I don't need to mention the name of the overnight carrier, but it is an overnight carrier, and part of the remedial action is to seek an alternative shipping source or shipping service due to this. It was what it was. Staff reviewed it carefully. If we get some more information from the Rangers investigation, which I'm not too optimistic about, then there may be some additional information provided. But right now, the staff had recommended taking no further action, which I concur with. And I'm prepared to, I'll go ahead and make that in form of a motion at this time.
We did receive more information. The Rangers did look into it. They looked at video footage. I mean, it's pretty thorough. And I think their conclusion is that we probably will never know what happened to that, because once it's with the ship, the carrier.
I have a question. So this carrier comes up in a different case as well, and then they're moving away from this carrier. Is it I mean, I know forensic nurses sometimes use the same character to,
Both labs
Ship.
indicate they're moving to different
right.
carriers, yes.
Should we also not use this carrier? Does anyone have an opinion?
We as
Or
the
should
commission.
I don't know if they lose, I mean, I don't know why y'all decided to move away, except that this has been quite a few items that they have lost. And I think maybe the more daunting thing about it is not so much, I mean, we're moving lots of things day in and day out, but when they went to try to work with them to figure out, so tell me, where did this get lost along the way? There was very little feedback from them about, they look at what's in their computers, it says pretty much nothing. And then there's no way for them to do a further review, it seems like. Because if you look at the write-up, they tried to work with them to get an understanding of where did this get lost. Was it sitting in a facility? Was it, what happened? And it just seems like they didn't give very good feedback. So I don't know if that would be, it'd be hard to say. I don't know.
So we've always assumed that the chain of custody was secure with FedEx. Oops. That's why we use them.
There you go.
That's public information anyway.
It's fine, it's fine.
No, we're not. I think Mark is trying to be, I think you
I think you're involved in this somewhere, Jarvis.
So I don't know if you all want to say anything else about why you ultimately decided to switch, except that this had happened a bunch of times and you weren't getting great answers for where the stuff might have gotten out, right?
Brady Mills, Texas Department of Public Safety. This is, I mean, we're on the sending end of this one, and then we also have another instance where we're also the sender. But we've made internal decisions to just move to a different vendor just based on the number of occurrences that this has occurred, and then just the struggle that we've had to try to work through the issue. But we've had issues with any time we put things in the mail. Over time, we've seen all of our vendors or couriers have issues of loss. And then in our instance, when we interact with NMS, we're actually partnering with the Texas Highway Patrol, and they're driving our shipments up to Dallas to do that submission based on just things getting lost in the process.
That seems expensive, having to drive this stuff. Right? Yes.
Hi, I'm Elise Watts from NMS Labs, and we are the lab that received the damaged packages. Excuse me. We have seen this a few times over the years, and we, for the most part, use secure Pelican boxes to ship items of evidence. It did not happen in this particular case. It was in just plain cardboard boxes. So that is an alternative that we suggest to all of our clients, is to, if they are going to use these overnight shipping companies, that they should use the Pelican boxes that can be locked and secured.
I didn't even know that was a thing. A Pelican, I didn't even know what a Pelican was.
Tell us what a Pelican box is.
Oh, I'm sorry. It's like one of those big black plastic boxes that you see at trade shows. People ship their stuff to trade shows in those kinds of boxes. They can be all different sizes, from small to really big, and we can.
How's the recipient able to open it?
I'm sorry?
How's the recipient able to open it?
It's a combination lock that only the two people, the sender and the receiver, have access to the numbers.
Good.
Any other questions?
And I'll renew the motion, Dr. Bernard, that we take no further action given the information for us.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next matter. It's also the Houston Forensic Science Center, item 23.28, Crime Scene Investigation Unit. They discovered some original handwritten case notes were misplaced in 3 different cases, and they could not locate the notes after extensive search. For the first 2 cases, the analysts actually wrote draft reports before misplacing the notes. The laboratory decided not to release those 2 technical reports in those cases, but rather released an administrative report for the cases that summarize the situation and referred the reader to the corrective action. In the 3rd case, the lab located a scanned copy of the handwritten notes. They issued a copy of a report with technical results in the case and appropriate comments. Late in May, the laboratory found one of the missing case packets and detailed how the lab located the record and a copy of many reports, including we saw those in our materials. The lab has contacted the prosecutor's office, also the defense counsel, to advise in the development. It is what it is. I don't know what else could have been done, but staff had reviewed the matter and made a recommendation to take no further action, which, if there aren't any questions or comments, I can make that in the form of a motion. Any thoughts or comments? If not, Dr. Bernard, I'll make that formally in the form of a motion.
Is there a second? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And that brings us to our next matter. It's also out of Houston Forensic Science Center. It's item 23.30 out of their firearms and tool mark section. They had undertaken an evidence audit, and an item of evidence could not be located. They conducted an extensive search in all the firearms evidence vaults. The search failed to locate the item. The missing items were actually test fires from an officer's weapon that involved a officer-involved shooting, and the case had been resolved through presentation to grand jury and no action taken or being no billed. The lab conducted its own assessment. They identified 4 areas of concern with their current practices. One, that firearm examiners who leave evidence in their in-progress boxes longer than necessary. There are also examiners who leave evidence unsealed in their in-progress boxes, and they don't include routine audits. Lastly, when returning evidence, the firearms examiners do not verify the evidence is labeled correctly and the chain of custody matches the actual evidence. The evidence remains missing. It appears to have been reviewed carefully. The lab undertook a risk assessment, and also mitigating steps are currently being implemented. In light of all the information before us, staff had made a recommendation that we take no further action. And if there aren't any comments or questions, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion. If not, I will formally make that in the form of a motion. We take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our next matter. It's item 23.31. It comes out of the Jefferson County Sheriff's Office Crime Lab. They had accidentally shipped a blood sample to Sorensen up in Utah instead of a DPS regional lab in Austin. Sorensen promptly refused the package, and it was returned to Jefferson County. The lab then shipped the package to DPS Austin on April 12th of this year, and tracked as being delivered 2 days later on the 14th. It appears that it spent about 16 days unrefrigerated. The lab started checking all the shipments the last year and saw this was the only case that was improperly forwarded to the wrong address. They determined that some instructions in the evidence handling procedure for double checking the address were kind of vague and really weren't sufficient to mitigate against accidentally including an incorrect address. The lab has since revised its evidence handling procedures, and they require a second review to verify the accuracy of the outbound addresses. They've also notified the prosecutor's office of the issue. In light of all the information for us, staff had reviewed this carefully and brought forth a recommendation of taking no further action, which I concur with, and I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion if there aren't any questions or comments. If not, I will formalize that in the form of a motion, Dr. Bernard.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And our next item is 23.33. It comes out of Bexar County Criminal Investigation Lab, Forensic Biology Unit. There was an analyst who was testifying, and the forensic science supervisor was monitoring live testimony during the trial. And they had documentation or issue concerning documentation showing a quality check for a presumptive semen reagent was utilized during biology screening. The analyst had conducted a presumptive test for semen and reported as negative, but use of the expired reagent risks a false negative result. Neither the analyst or the reviewer actually flagged the issue during the oversight for the case review. The supervisor told the prosecutor the very next day, and they offered additional testing. I guess sounds to me like it while the trial was going on, but they didn't get any request for additional testing. The lab has since reviewed all serology cases from the date the lab released the analyst for independent casework until the date it was discovered, which was from February through May. The forensic science supervisor concluded it was likely the analyst prepared and quality checked for the new reagents in March of 2023, but forgot to document this in the Forensic Advantage worksheet. All the documentation concerning the case is correct. It appears to be an isolated mistake on the part of this one screener. In light of their review and root cause analysis and corrective action taken, staff had brought forth a recommendation we take no further action. I concur with that. If there aren't any comments or questions, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a formal motion. No questions, no comments. I will make that in the formal motion that we take no further action. Dr. Bernard?
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Our next item comes out of Jefferson County Regional Crime Lab, also the seized drugs units. They discovered some analysts were using an expired secondary amine color test reagent. The secondary amine test is a two-part color test used in the seized drug section. The first one expired in April of 2020, April 24th, actually. The second should have been quality tested on April 24th of 2023. They discovered the lapse date, and the analyst tested both reagents, and both still passed the quality test. The lab said 50 cases were done using the secondary amine lot as part of the analysis. In all the cases, the analyst performed a second color test along with the gas chromatograph testing for confirmation. The secondary amine color test results in the cases that used the expired lot were consistent with expected results. The lab believes analysts missed the expiration for the secondary amine reagents because of failure to record this task on the seized drugs calendar, and also used to track, which was used to track the required test dates. The scientists also did not check the expiration retest date on the reagent bottles before using them. They're now updating their procedure manual to require a second scientist to initial when a new reagent is utilized, and all logs, calendars, reagent labels have been properly updated. They've also notified all of the affected cases to the stakeholders involved, and copies of the changes to the operating procedure. Again, it was what it was, and staff had reviewed it carefully. In light of the root cause analysis by the lab and also the corrective action, staff had made a recommendation of no further action, which I concur with. If there aren't any questions or comments, I'm prepared to make that in the form of a motion. With no questions, Dr. Bernard, I will formalize that with a motion to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then our next item is 23.37, DPS Austin, seized drugs revolving gunshot residue. This is another overnight carrier issue. They had a couple of shipments involving gunshot residue. They had travel history on each item. One was unable to deliver, but still kind of remains in transit over a year later. And the other was refused by a recipient and put back into the shipping lanes, and also unable to deliver, and also remains in transit. Shipment number 3 has also had a long vacation since 2022, and it also remains in transit. The lab made a number of attempts to get information from the carrier, and those requests sort of went unanswered, which is an issue. Finally, on shipment 1, the carrier advised it had been disposed of, yet gave no justification for it. On the second shipment, there was documentation that it was to be returned to the lab, and they don't have a tracking information on the return shipment. And the third they also disposed of and provided no justification for taking that measure. So I understand the lab has remedied all this, would make sense. Let's use a different carrier, which they're about to do, and we've heard comments about that today. All I can say is it is what it is. We had a carrier with some obvious issues and quality issues, and staff had made a recommendation taking no further action in light of all the investigative action and the change in the shipping providers about to be undertaken. This is very similar to other matter, and it's certainly an area for concern, but not something that we can do any more than the lab has done. So if there's not any comments or questions, I'll make a motion we take no further action. With no comments, no questions, Dr. Bernard, I'll formalize that in the form of a motion to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And our next matter is 2339. It comes from DPS Houston, Seized Drugs Unit. It involves a mislabeled syringe that ended up being destroyed within the lab. And the Hardin County District Attorney had submitted a request for analysis on a syringe. The lab responded the analysis was not conducted because there was no request that accompanied this submission. They found the evidence actually was destroyed back in October of 2022. Typically, when syringe evidence is submitted without a request for testing, the correct process is to receive the evidence and issue a closed without analysis report. In this instance, it appears the technicians did not recognize the submission form was not a submission for destruction form, but it still got destroyed. The lab's evaluating different methods to highlight the distinction between submission forms for destruction and the regular submission forms. It appears they're undertaking to seek to correct that. In light of the mistake and the problem, the staff had brought forth a recommendation to take no further action in light of the root cause analysis and corrective action. I respectfully concur with that. We'll make that in the form of a motion if there aren't any questions or comments. That being the case, Dr. Bernard, I'll make that in the form of a motion to take no further action.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Which brings us to our complaints. There's only one. It's item 23.20, and we've dealt with this for some time now, but it's a complaint filed by attorney out of North Carolina. Their client was convicted in North Carolina of sexual assault and kidnapping way back 2018. Carolina had collected blood and urine from the victim in the case. The blood test was negative. The urine test was positive for clonazepam. The complaint alleges the hospital collected a care sample and forwarded it to the expert tox for testing. The expert tox date rate panel was negative. However, expert tox detected cyclobenzaprine and did not detect clonazepam in the hair analysis. I know we've dealt with Dr. Lakissa some. He testified at trial that both drugs created some synergistic effect on the victim, rendering her mentally and physically incapacitated. In our last meeting, we tabled the complaint pending adoption of the Commission's expert tox report in unrelated matter, which should address Dr. Lakissa's concerns. Staff had brought forth a recommendation that we dismiss the complaint because the concerns articulated by the complainant were really reviewed and disposed of in the report adopted at our last quarterly meeting. I hope y'all recall that. It was very detailed. It was very factually based, and I believe it addresses the same matter. So in light of that, staff had recommended to dismiss this complaint. I concur with that. Any questions or comments?
We did send, sorry, it's working again.
Whoa.
It's working. Thank you, Steve. We did send the report that the commission adopted from the last meeting to this attorney, since it covers essentially the same ground, and certainly the expert who we retained, Dr. Rohrig, covered a lot of the technical ground in the report that he provided to the commission. So the attorney does have that, and it is on our website also. But this is a North Carolina case, and I think we've received outreach from various states with similar inquiries. So we have been referring them all to the report in its final version.
No further comments or questions. I will formalize that in the form of a motion to dismiss this complaint.
Is there a second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
And then just for housekeeping purposes, in the past quarter, staff had dismissed 4 complaints. One item 2327, 23.32, 23.35, and 23.36. They, per our policy, have authority to do that. I always think it's appropriate just to offer a very brief summary and ensure that that we give blessing to that. 23.37 was dismissed in light of it involving a human resources issue outside the scope of our jurisdiction. 23.32 was dismissed for failure to allege professional negligence or misconduct, and we had no authority to seek post-conviction testing. 2335 was dismissed for an overall complete lack of jurisdiction. And 23.36 was dismissed because testing available at the time did not include gender determination, and we have no authority to impose or order post-conviction testing. So I'd like to make a formal motion that the commission give its approval to dismissal of those 4 matters by staff.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
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 Opposed? Motion carried.
Dr. Marr, that concludes item 4.
All right, thank you. All right, agenda item number 5.
So we have done a couple of things for your materials that I think hopefully will be helpful to you. Lee and I were getting a lot of non-consensus PT results coming in, and the reason is because ANAB changed its articulated expectations on how those are handled. And so we get a lot of them, and we created 2 separate inboxes for labs, one called ANAB and one called A2LA. And so they send those, and Lee receives them. And then what we thought was more helpful is to create actually 2 separate memoranda, one for accreditation-related activities and one that just talks about PT. And she has separated in the PT memo into different categories of things that we see. You know, some of them are they're non-issues really. You know, it's like non-consensus PT because we don't do that analysis. And some of them are things that we will have to update you on again at the next meeting because they actually do require substantive follow-up.
I think we lost your mic again, maybe.
Oh, really? It's coming in and out? Yeah.
I'll just come up here so I don't have to yell from my seat, actually. The commission, if you see in the accreditation summary that she's referring to, had 5 major accreditation-related communications or activities this quarter. 3 laboratories had successful surveillance assessments by ANAB or continuations of accreditation. 1 full on-site reassessment for accreditation and reaccreditation by ANAB. The commission also received a finalized quality incident report as a follow-up from the Department of Public Safety's 2022 surveillance assessment that was related to a nonconformity that we asked them to follow up on with us on, that we found satisfactory, and I think Lynn discussed that with Vanessa, and I don't know that there's anything further we need to.
Dr. Coble, you've looked at that. This was the issue around the validation in Houston for the Ys. So,
That's right,
yeah.
yes.
Did anyone have questions on the memorandum any further than that brief summary? We also, I just wanted to go over quickly, we sent out letters related to, as you all know, we finalized our report in the Cologne matter. So what we did there was that report included 3 policy recommendations regarding testimony preparation that crime laboratories accredited by the commission obviously have to implement in advance of their next assessment activity that occurs after September 1, 2022. So we sent notice letters to all accredited laboratories explaining that ANAB or A2LA accordingly will be assessing compliance with those 3 policy items using either document review or staff interviews as applicable under either ISO IEC provision 17025-2017 or ISO IEC 17020-2012 7.1.1. And so those letters are also included in your materials. The letter included a policy implementation guidance document from the TACLD, the Texas Association of Forensic Quality Assurance Managers, that was super helpful, that they helped us develop and include and attach to that letter. And also a reference and link to a training on the policy recommendations in the Cologne report that Lynn gave, that anyone is welcome to access as well, that will help folks implement those recommendations and understand what we're talking about in that report. And then also we sent out letters to ask, to help better facilitate communication between forensic science service providers and the national accrediting bodies about new email addresses that we created for ANAB and A2LA. They're just email inboxes that we're asking folks to copy us on. Rather than sending the emails to me or to someone else on the commission, we're just asking that they use those email addresses. So we included copies of those letters for you all to show you what we've been doing on that front. And finally here, I think the only other item for accreditation is the proficiency testing memo. Staff received 14 reported proficiency monitoring communications, and as Lynn said, we've divided them into categories, and the categories here are method not used in casework, answer outside accepted or validated reporting limits, test provider or manufacturing error, clerical mistake by the analyst or the test participant with no impact on competency necessarily, non-consensus results that may impact the competency in this situation, and then DNA mixture interpretation. We have one in this memorandum that might carry over into our next meeting, but I think the rest of them are issues that were resolved or explained in the memorandum, so you might see that one issue carry over. Are there any questions about anything else that's in that memorandum?
So we separated out DNA mixture interpretation to make Dr. Cobal's life easier. I'm kind of only half joking. No, we separated it out because we want to see if there are trends in this area. And we thought I was looking at it and I thought we should really put these together, because if everybody's taking the same PT, which is not necessarily true, but if they are, we want to see what's happening when we have non-consensus, what are they related to, and so forth. So I don't know if you found that helpful, Dr.
It was very helpful, yeah. And I think it just is another component of mixture interpretation, is that there are stochastic effects that we see in these low-level mixtures, and that's generally the root of a lot of these problems, just the randomness of amplification. Some alleles show up and some don't. So.
It's fascinating to see that play out in the context of these, of the proficiency activities, actually, and how the labs resolve them and how they evaluate them is instructive in its own right, actually, and it will help us as we do our DNA training, I think, because we can say, oh, what about that? You remember that PT exercise that you all got? Let's talk about that one, or something.
I think that is it on the accreditation front, unless anybody has any questions about those items. Dr. Bernard? Want to move on to agenda item 6,
Okay.
licensing update?
Sure. Let's go on with that.
All right, the first item for licensing, currently, just to give you all an update, we have 1,240 licensees. We met yesterday with our licensing advisory committee. We're expecting to launch our voluntary licensing program for latent print and digital voluntary license analysts in the next couple weeks. We finalized a voluntary standards chart, which is the final piece that we were waiting on for that program. So included in your materials is a chart that we'd like you all to look at. What we were waiting on is the top piece there of that chart related to the OSAC registry standards. And there's a provision in the chart that requires laboratories to employing laboratories for these voluntary forensic analysts to consider and have a training program for their friction ridge analysts at the top of the chart there. And the rest of the standards are key provisions from AR 3125. So I'm not sure if you all have had a chance to look at that.
I did want to add, we had originally talked about utilizing the OSAC proposed standards that Friction Ridge has come up with, which are very good and very thoughtful. However, it is challenging for a laboratory, I think, to contemplate implementation of proposed standards because we don't know what will happen when they come back through the SDO, through ASB. In the case of Friction Ridge, they may change. Certainly is true. That doesn't mean we want to let go of them. We just want to make sure that what we give the laboratories are things that we know are impactful. And so we sort of shifted toward looking more toward AR 3125 as guidance, which is the supplemental standard for ANAB. And we found that by bringing different people together who do Friction Ridge work and who also train on this in our state at different size agencies, accredited and not accredited agencies, it was helpful to have them take a look at it and see what is feasible. We're grateful to the El Paso Sheriff's Office for participating in that exercise, and there are many other people at Texas IAI who are waiting for this program to be released because they really want to apply. So we tried to go for the things that are most impactful and not burden the labs, and also be mindful that proposed standards are not ideal. Not saying that they're not good standards, just that they're a bit of a moving target for folks. So this is how we ended up where we are. And we're very grateful to the LAC members for working through this month after month.
Yeah, one of the key things I think that we decided yesterday is that top piece of the chart is we decided to direct staff to work with the TDIAI, like Lynn said, to develop a model training program for Friction Ridge analysts. We want to ask them for help in developing a program, because I think what we recommended in that chart is so bare bones that we're afraid that someone's going to come forward to us and say, well, here's our training program. It has bullet points A, B, and C, and we just don't think it's robust enough. So we don't want to be left as commission staff making those judgment calls. So we'd like to get help from the TDIAI if we can. So we wanted that to be part of the vote today, to get permission from you all to ask them for help in developing a model training program.
I mean, Shelley Rossi is the president. I mean, all the people that are in the executive leadership of that organization right now, I am very confident will be happy to work with us on that. And it also gives agencies a place to go that they're familiar with and that they feel comfortable with. And so I'm really excited about, this was Aaron Reed's idea. Is Aaron here? As one of his last brilliant ideas as the chairman of the LAC was this one, and it was a really good idea. So we're excited to go talk with IAI and Texas, the Texas division. I stumble over TDIAI for some reason, but we're going to reach out to them, and I think they'll be very receptive.
Should we move forward with the vote on that one?
I think so.
We will
So
need
we're going to jump down to that one.
I think we do need.
Yeah, I'm sorry, I
motion.
launched into that one because we were talking about the.
I was waiting for the other one. I thought that was
Okay,
afterwards.
do you want to go back to the nominations, or do you want to?
Well, we can go on. We've already talked about this. We'll just get it out of the way and then move
Go
on.
ahead and do the first, the motion that starts with approved charter
Yeah.
provisions.
Yeah, so is there a motion to approve the charter provisions required to be implemented by employing laboratories, voluntary license applicants, and direct staff to work with the Texas Division of the International Association for Identification on the development of model training for Friction Ridge analysts to satisfy the published requirements?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? That motion carries.
So at yesterday's licensing meeting, we had 5 members that served their last term at the licensing meeting, so we were sorry to see them serve their last time there. But we had 14 stellar candidates recommended by the TACLD, and so we were super grateful to have such a wonderful list of candidates. Any one of them would have been really wonderful to be picked. They were a great list of nominees. We had candidates covering 7 different disciplines and representing city, county, public, and private laboratories at different levels of leadership and roles. So we were very grateful for that. And you have the list of candidates in front of you all, the nominations from TACLD. I think that any of them would be great, but we do need to take a vote in selecting some of them. We did try to put forth recommendations to you all that were for disciplines for those that are falling off, because we tried to make sure that we have representation from each of the disciplines, especially those that we're going to, crime scene, for example, that we're going to be making rules for. That will be one of the primary objectives that the licensing board is going to be working on in the next couple meetings.
Yeah, I just want to second what Lee's saying about the list. Every single person we got would be fabulous, and they're highly qualified. All Lee and I did was sit down and look at the list and say, which disciplines are we losing, which labs in terms of state, public, private, or city, and then just try to plug up those gaps and not repeat labs. So we tried to have 5 different laboratories or 5 different agencies and 5 different disciplines. And by the time we got through with that exercise, we ended up with 5 that we thought would work. But it's not to say that the others aren't great, and we will, hopefully they will reapply when other folks roll off. So ultimately what we came up with for the list was we're losing 2 Bexar County people, and so including our chair. So from Bexar County, we're suggesting Ed Wallace, who is a firearm tool mark expert with 29 years of experience. Then for Leighton Prince, and this will be the first time that we have someone from Plano PD with us, but Michelle Paulson has come to our meetings for many times and has participated in the work of the LAC and asked some great questions, and we think she would be great, and she has expertise in Friction Ridge. Andrew Greenwood from HCIFS in toxicology. There was another highly qualified toxicologist. And so we just thought that it would be good to have someone from HCIFS, because I don't think we have I don't know if we, in a little while, certainly. And then Catherine Sanchez from City of Austin Lab. Her background is in seized drugs, but she's also a quality manager, and we think that's helpful. Our quality manager from Bexar is not going to be on anymore, so it'll be great to have her. Karina Haynes from HFSC, who's crime scene, and is a director there and has extensive experience, and obviously she's dealing with crime scene work in very challenging jurisdiction in Harris County. So she has a lot of understanding of the pressures on crime scene generally, and the work and the interface with agencies and so forth. So that's what we came up with, and it's simply because of trying to be, to make sure we have different labs, different disciplines, and we think this is a great slate of candidates.
Any discussion on the recommendations? All right, is there a motion to accept the nominees that have been put forward?
So moved.
So there is a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries.
Okay, I have one final thing to update you on from the licensing meeting yesterday. We also voted to recommend to the full commission that you all approve a rulemaking proposing changes, and we discussed this at the last commission meeting as well, changes to licenses expiring at the end of a forensic analyst or technician's birth month. We evaluated data that gathered by staff that demonstrates a pretty even spread of birth dates across the 12 months that will really ease the burden on staff and licensees as far as administrative processing of license renewals, which currently expire in even-numbered years in the fall, since a majority of our licensees became licensed at the inception of the licensing program. as you all know, in January 1, 2019. The proposal prorates continuing forensic education by requiring only the mandatory legal and professional responsibility course for anyone applying for the first time up front. So they just have to take that course, and then when they renew for the first time after a 2-year period, they'll have to take all the they'll have to have all the CFE that a regular licensee would. For current licensees that lose any time or have less than 2 years to complete any CFE, their CFE requirements will be prorated on a monthly basis based on how much time they lose or gain based on their birth month. And then the fees also are prorated on a monthly basis. And so we sat there and deliberated and talked about how this would be most fair. And also the commission will incur no loss in revenue fees. And if you all looked at our budget earlier, everyone understands that we can't afford to incur any loss in our budget. And so this is our proposal to you, and we hope that we can make a motion to propose these amendments to the rules.
Okay, so is there any discussion? All right, so is there a motion to propose the amendments to the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 651, regarding changing licenses expiration dates to the licensee's birth date, subject to suggested non-substantive revisions of the office, from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register and Staff?
So moved.
Second? Second. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. All right, item number 7, this is an update, or proposed to be an update.
So this is the complaint that we received from the National IP and other attorneys regarding Nanan Williams and the firearms issues. We had been delaying this until the NIST foundational review on firearms, which they've been working on for years now. And every time we go to another conference, like AFTI was in Austin this year, and we find out that it's still not coming out, that they're not going to get to it. I think October now they're talking about. So I would like to get some guidance from y'all, because I think at this point our complainants have been very patient, because I think they're interested in a thorough report, comprehensive report. At the same time, I feel like we should really just move forward and start moving down the path toward resolution, because I don't know when that NIST foundational review is. I mean, they've said multiple times it's coming out, and then they always extend it. I don't think that what's in the NIST foundational review will be so new in terms of information that we can't incorporate a lot of what's likely to come forward in that in our assessment. So my suggestion is that we stop waiting on NIST and we just move forward and try to get a draft to you for October. Unless you all feel strongly that we need to wait on that foundational review. I just feel like it's just dragged on too long.
Well, I mean, I think it would be beneficial to have it, but if there's no end in sight, then we do need to bring this to a resolution, and we can always discuss whatever their opinions are later on.
We keep thinking they're going to bring it to close, but then they extend it. And it is a huge undertaking. I'm not trying to be critical. It's a massive undertaking. But even, Lee's chairing jurisprudence section again, and she reached out in that capacity to ask them to present at the Academy meeting in Denver on the foundational review, thinking it's going to be done, and they said no. So I don't know if that's because they don't think it's really going to be done, or because you would think they'd want to present it at the Academy. So I'm not really sure why they declined, but maybe it's just going to take longer than still. And so that didn't seem like a great sign to me.
But you think with regard to this, at least you can address what you need to by the October meeting, or?
Yeah, I mean, it's going to be a push, but I think we have enough. There's recent literature that's come out that's very helpful. I think in this case, what we're trying to really get at for firearms is a difficult problem in a lot of disciplines, which is what does the end user understand about the limitations of what can be said? And what does the end user understand about the wide range of quality of evidence that comes into a lab? And the fact that in firearms in particular, getting to an elimination result is quite challenging, and that's not necessarily the same as it is in other disciplines. So looking into all those things and making recommendations is really what we're intending to do.
Well, I mean, it is a significant topic. So, I mean, I would rather, if it can't be done by October and really cover it, January may have to do, but if you can get it done, great. But it is one that has a substantial impact in the field of forensics and in the courtroom. So it needs to be covered as well as you can cover it. So rather than try to rush it, I think, you know, do whatever you think you can do with it.
I think by January, certainly we can have a draft.
Yeah, okay.
So why don't we aim for that then?
All right. All right, item number 8 is a topic that we were going to cover, but this has been moved to probably the October meeting.
I think we right now have a 60-page draft that we're working on with Ron Smith and Associates, with the Harris County Public Defender, with the Harris County District Attorney's Office, and the Houston Forensic Science Center. I do want to say that we, I think, are quite close to being able, we certainly will have it for a vote at the next meeting. I want to pause for a moment to really recognize how much work Houston, the lab, has done and how responsive they've been to every request for every tedious thing that we've asked them to do. They've run blinds through their system. They have been really responsive, and we are grateful for that. We could not have done this report without their willingness to participate. And it's a hard thing to do because they're, you know, there's always a question of what happens when we run it through again. And is this going to expose areas that need improvement? And I think they've shown a tremendous willingness to participate. And the same thing has been true for all the parties. And I'm hopeful that we'll be able to get to a resolution. Dr. Busini has been at my side through the entire thing, and I'm grateful for him helping with the technical aspects of this, certainly. Did you want to add anything, Dr. Busini?
No, I mean, I'm excited to continue to work on this panel, and they're very important topics, and it's important for us to really hear all the sides and all the inputs and try to learn from them.
Again, it's important to cover it well and to do it right. So if October you're ready to go, great. But again, the topic's got to be covered. It's a significant issue to address. All right, item number 9.
So we updated and amended the Brazoria County report that was a result of a self-disclosure that the lab director gave us. And what we did was we amended it to reflect some feedback from ANAB. They went back and did their own internal review historically of what they looked at during prior assessments that predate the current lab director. And they gave us some feedback as a result of their research on it. And what they found was that, as you might recall, there are really 2 issues. One involves blood alcohol, and the other, the analysis of drugs in blood. And the drug blood issue they had identified, and there were SOP changes that were made, but the ultimate follow-through and casework wasn't there, and they didn't observe that because they didn't happen to sample cases that would have demonstrated that. And on the blood alcohol issue, just none of their sampling revealed the issue that was identified in the report. So we want to make sure that we are accurate when we talk about ANAB and A2LA and what they have done or what they haven't. And when there's an issue that we identify that they may not have through an assessment, we want to give them an opportunity to look at it and tell us their best assessment of why it might not have been identified. So as part of our effort at collaborating with them, we were happy to amend this report and put it in front of you for a vote. They've reviewed it and they feel that it accurately reflects what they observed when they were doing their assessment in 2015 and after that. And again, this is historical information, but that's what we wanted to put in front of you.
All right, is there any discussion? Is there a motion to accept the final investigative report?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second?
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. So item number 10, current training projects.
So we, as you might recall, had a meeting of DNA analysts at UNT Health Science Center at the Chi in Fort Worth. That was a really great meeting. It lasted a couple of days. The commission funded travel, and the analysts came and talked about the hardest problems in DNA mixture interpretation. And they talked about how one views suitability for interpretation. In other words, which mixtures, based on the way the data presents, are suitable for interpretation and which ones not, and why. And it was a very interesting discussion. And so we want to keep that going. And so one of the ways that we're proposing to do that is to have 2 in-person meetings per year and 2 meetings where the analysts bring challenging samples from validation, and they talk through what they're seeing there and how to resolve it and what the different considerations are. So Garen Foster from Bexar County has graciously volunteered to lead the gathering of the challenging samples and conversations around them. So they will be having on August 18th another Zoom meeting to talk through that. And then we are also working with Judge Hervey in the Court of Criminal Appeals on DNA training for lawyers and judges, which Senator Hinojosa has very graciously reserved the Capitol Auditorium for us. Those of you who've been around quite some time, I know Dr. Kerrigan, you were there when we did training there many years ago. And so the nice thing about the Capitol Auditorium is it gets piped out to everybody in the Capitol. So you can watch it on Capitol TV. I don't know how many of the staffers will be interested, but it'll all be there. But judges can watch, you know, staff attorneys can watch from the comfort of their office. So we're excited. We met yesterday to talk about the fact scenario on that. And Michael Falkenberg is helping us, who's a former CCA attorney and now does appellate writ work in particular at the Harris County Public Defender's Office, so having him will be helpful. The court's general counsel is going to help present on Michael Morton Act issues. We are absolutely thrilled to be able to bring this program to lawyers. We're going to open it up. I think what we're going to do is send out sort of an interest, you know, you can reserve your spot kind of Eventbrite thing through TDCAA and TCDLA and the Texas Center for the Judiciary and see how much interest we get. My guess is that we'll get an overwhelming level of interest, but there are only 300 and change seats in the auditorium, so we will have to see. You know, some of the larger DA's offices, for example, they could fill the whole thing. But we really want to make sure that everybody has a chance to come and participate. We will record it so people can watch it after, but to participate in the live program, people will need to reserve their spot. I think that those 3 entities, TCDLA, TDCA, and the Texas Center, are the best way to get this information out there, unless Mark or Jarvis, you disagree with that. Do you think that's the way to go? So it's going to, the way that it works is we've developed a scenario, which yesterday we realized has too much going on in it. So we're going to trim it down a little bit. But the idea is that the lawyers come to this with a factual scenario that describes a crime. And from the very beginning of the crime all the way through through the appellate process. We're going to go through an issue spot with the lawyers, and we're going to talk about the key scientific and legal issues that are at play. And at the end, Michael Falkenberg is going to work with the lawyers to see what issues are really remaining for a writ, which ones aren't, how they might be treated. And so we're feeling like it's going to be a great program. We do want to strike a balance between making sure that trial lawyers are interested and appellate lawyers. So that's something that we may seek your thoughts on, Mark and Jarvis. We want to do something that appeals to everyone and that they get a lot of value from. And by creating a factual scenario as opposed to just standing up and doing PowerPoints on DNA, our hope is that people will be more engaged and get more out of it. So that is that program. We've already talked about the National Forensic Leadership Academy. We are doing another thing in November, which is very exciting, which is there's a new National Association of State Forensic Boards. So that's exciting because it's not just us anymore, and New York. There are actually lots of state forensic boards and commissions and advisory committees of all shapes and sizes. And we're going to meet here in Austin to talk about what we all do, what level of authority and funding all the different boards and commissions have, what good governance looks like, all that sort of stuff. And it's really been led by John Morgan and Marna McClendon. Marna's from Arizona, as you know. And John just released a really extensive article on issues in his reflections on innocence cases and the information about the forensic science role in those cases, and looking a little at in greater depth at all the various things that come into play that result in wrongful conviction beyond just the forensic issues. Because sometimes if you look at the dashboards on it, you don't actually really get a great sense of what's going on. So one of the items in this extensive article he wrote was about governance. And so it's a real area of interest for him, and everyone will be coming together here. And we're excited because they asked us to host the first one, and we said we would. And so some of you, we would really love it if some of you would be willing to come to that meeting, because it's a meeting for commissions and boards. There will be lab directors there, but it's not a lab director meeting. It's a meeting for people who have authority, responsibility for oversight of the forensic enterprise. So please think about how your calendars look, and if you can make it, that'd be great. We would love to have commission participation.
I think this is really exciting, and I'm thrilled that they're going to do it here in Austin. I just wish that they hadn't scheduled it literally days before a major forensic science meeting, because some of us will be traveling for that meeting. So.
I'm not sure which meeting is happening then?
The IAFS meeting, Patrick and I will be traveling for that.
Okay.
So
I think that we, scheduling is always a
Impossible.
challenge. I don't know that they were thinking about that meeting so much, but
we could just have the meeting at the site of the IAFS meeting in Sydney, Australia.
That sounds
I would
great.
support that.
I support that.
Let's all go. You'd get full participation from all of the commissioners, guaranteed.
Yes, I'm sure. It will just be in Austin, not in Australia. No beaches, but I think our hope is that we are able to then keep that momentum going and learn from each other.
Right.
And I think the other issue is the next in-person meeting on suitability determinations and DNA issues generally will be in December with the labs. And I'm really excited about that one because we're going to focus on testimony. And I think Don Boswell, who's here in the audience, has put together some really excellent approaches to how we look at testimony by taking transcripts and actually saying, you know, this is the way this issue was described. What do you think about that? Would you have said it that way? Is there another way that we could express these concepts? And so that's how, that general approach is how we're going to work through this particular in-person meeting where we talk about testimony in December. And that will also happen here. That's everything I have on that front. We do have Academy abstracts due soon. So we're working on that too.
I'm glad you're not very busy. All right, next is item number 11, legislative update.
So there are a couple of things there. One is that we have our lab portal initiative that is coming up, and I would like to invite Mr. Mills up to tell us where DPS is on that. And if, as you might recall, this is the legislation that requires a statewide laboratory records, are we calling it delivery system? What do we call it? Records portal. Records portal. Yeah, we have to brand it.
Brady Mills, Texas DPS. As you're aware, Senate Bill 991 did pass, and so that requires the DPS to establish a statewide crime laboratory portal or records portal to facilitate the transfer of laboratory records to both members of the courts, so to the prosecutors and then to the defense as well. So far what it establishes it in September 1st of this year, so in about a month. So we've undertaken a few things to get ready for September. The first, what we have done is we've done a request for information to the vendor community. So we've had a number of vendors respond to that. We've kind of whittled that down to just a few that we will do demos with forthcoming here in the next month or so. That's really to give us an idea of what's out there that's publicly available today. We're also setting up a stakeholders group. And so that stakeholders group would be made up of members. We're going to solicit membership from the professional organizations here in Texas for them to donate members to our stakeholders group. So TDCAA, TCDLA, the Office of Court Administration, the TACLD group, or the crime lab directors, also the quality group here in Texas, TAFQAM, and then the commission as well. And so that outreach will go out soon, and we expect to meet in our first meeting in September. And then we've named Justin Parker, who's our records program manager within the DPS, has an extensive background as a forensic scientist in trace, and now has been overseeing our records for the last few years to lead our effort in this process. And then he is actively starting to reach out to all the laboratories that fall under this legislation to see kind of what records they have, what systems they're using, and how to start coordinating all that. So a lot of good work to be done. We've just really scratched the surface. We envision this as being a long project over time with a lot of different input from a lot of different members in the criminal justice system, but we're excited that we have the opportunity to do this. So I don't know if there's any questions.
There's the vendor fair, did you mention that?
Yeah, well, I called it a vendor fair yesterday, but really it's kind of a vendor demo, and so that's coming as well, so I didn't mention that.
And New York has implemented full discovery essentially, and so they somehow were able to do it. And is one of the vendors, do you know, the one that has done that for them?
Yeah, so we did go through, we actually had the police agency or the state agency that supports that give us a demo of their product, so we've seen that one as well.
I'm dubious about this, but I think it's just going to be double work is what I think, but the law is what the law is.
Yes, sir.
It's extremely ambitious. I just want to clarify, so the records portal is going to work with LIMS from, regardless of the LIMS provider for each of the FSSPs.
That's why I'm dubious about
Yes,
this.
that's why I said it's extremely ambitious. And will that include homegrown LIMS as well, Brady?
Yes, we're going to start working. So when we were afforded the resources for this, we've got a team of 6 that'll frame up under Justin. We also have money for a vendor-supported solutions. We'll have a vendor, we'll have our own folks, but the vision is that we're going to start working with each individual laboratory to identify how those records are being stored today. And they may be in a SharePoint, they may be in a LIMS system, they may be in a some sort of information management system. But this system will be able to interact with all of those.
Good luck with that.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, and then after everybody goes through all of that, then you're going to have an attorney say, yeah, okay, that's fine, and then send an open records request, and you got to print it all out and send it to them again. So
By that time, Mark will be retired, so it'll be fine.
he was who I had in mind as the person who would do that.
Yeah, that's one thing we'll have to really do an education piece.
I'm gonna let him sit in the hallway for a couple of days too, just while we're.
That may be fishing when all that's accomplished.
But once it's up and running, it will be a fantastic resource, and it's great to hear that New York already went through the process, so it sounds as if there might be some hand-holding to do.
Yes, we do have folks that we can look at that have, are going through it right as we speak, so, great, thank you.
All right, item number 12.
So we need to, actually, there was one more thing on legislative issues. So as well as
Oh, sorry.
SB 991 also had in it a change to the way that appeals are done. So if you recall, when the licensing program was brought into place, if a licensee wants to appeal an action of the commission, say we were to revoke their license or something, they appeal to the Judicial Branch Certification Commission and then to the regional presiding judges if that's the full route of the appeal. And our statute did not have delineated a similar route for when laboratories would want to appeal. For example, if we took an accreditation decision that they did not like, or if we said that the laboratory committed some form of misconduct or otherwise violated a rule of the commission. So this bill also harmonizes that appellate process. So that is something that we have a rule where we have affected that for you to vote on.
So is there a motion to propose the amendments to the Texas Administrative Code, Chapter 651, responsive to legislative changes to the Commission's appeals process, subject to suggested non-substantive revisions from the Office of the Governor, Texas Register, and staff?
So moved.
Is there a second?
Second.
All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Next, we have the update from the Texas Association of Crime Laboratory Directors. I have the alarm clock on here.
I was going to say, he's going to tell me to be brief. Hi, yeah, Peter Stout, Texas Association of Crime Lab Directors. We met yesterday. Probably, I think, a couple of the biggest updates for the organization. We now have 60 members in TACLD with 20 voting members. So that means there are basically 20 laboratories that are in the organization now. It's actually become pretty large. We elected a new treasurer. This is the first time we've had a treasurer, and we elected to actually collect dues. So we are desperately dangerously close to being like a real organization. And my wife will be very happy to not have me paying for the website anymore. Other major conversation we had was about some of the legislative update stuff. I think while there are a variety of bills that may have some implications for labs, I think the biggest ones are House Bill 6, which is the one that changed the fentanyl poisoning language and the demand to sign out the manner of death as homicide, which I'm sure Dr. Bernard.
I don't think that went through.
No, it did.
Well, someone's gonna have to show that to me, because that's not what we were told and what we saw.
Yeah, let's go take a look. Yeah,
I'm not arguing with you. I'm
Yeah,
gonna
it's
have to see it,
been
but
signed now, and I'm pretty
no
sure
one
that-
else that I knew of,
Yeah.
no other medical examiner understood that the manner went through as homicide, that they were gonna change it.
That's what I understand. That's what was signed. So it's probably something
Well, that's gonna be
definitely worth
interesting. We
checking.
were all gonna break the law.
Yeah.
I think they
so that
had, they had changed it and then they changed it back.
They changed it at the last minute back to homicide.
That's my understanding,
That's
but
my
I'll pull it
understanding.
up.
Well,
Yeah,
the
we should-
amount of controversy that'll go into the
Oh, yeah.
courtroom
Oh, yeah.
when the medical examiner is asked about it is
Yep.
going to be,
Oh, it's going to have unintended consequences.
well, that's interesting. Is it possible somebody can send me the
Yeah,
final,
we
just
can,
so
we'll
I
get that
can,
final language.
my staff will be so delighted by
Yes.
that.
I think another one that will have significant impacts for labs is House Bill 3506, and actually it will have impacts for you all too. This is the one that is really in response to the San Francisco issue where an individual, her profile was in an exclusion database because she was a victim in a sexual assault, and then that profile was later used to implicate her in a property crime. So this bill requires laboratories to manage and what types of evidence can be retained in a exclusion database or a local database, and the rulemaking authority on how we do that is up to you all. And I think the deadline on that was December 1st, I think
Yes.
yeah. So there's some work to do there. Honestly, I'm glad the rulemaking authority is here because clearly there are some really delicate aspects of that. We could upend quality assurance measures within laboratories, and I think TAFQAM was already volunteering to help with writing those because it certainly affects the quality aspect of things. I think the other big one that has, there were several bills that affected how genetic data can be stored and accessed. I am not nearly smart enough to predict what implications those are going to have. There is a pretty hotly contested debate about whether they will really affect the applicability of forensic genetic genealogy or not. Not a lawyer. I just know it's all been signed and now everybody's going to start arguing about it. Senate Bill 402, I think, may have some implications for labs. That one requires the prioritization of courts trying homicide cases. So I suspect there may be some unintended consequences there of jamming labs up on which do you prioritize now, because there's a state law saying you got to prioritize sexual assault kit analysis and a law saying you got to prioritize homicides. So which state law do we break and which one we put first?
There's also a law that talks about judges prioritizing kid cases, so injury to a child or child sex assault cases.
Oh, terrific.
There's a lot of priorities.
Yeah, we got priorities. I think those were the big ones that have broad effect across all of the laboratories in the state. There's some stuff. There were a few that affected public information requests and some subtle changes there. Harris County is getting 6 new district courts over the next 2 years, which will be really exciting to basically add 25% again as many courts in Harris County. But those were the big ones. So our new treasurer is actually Emily Esquivel. Thank you for stepping into that. She said she'd do it as a last resort. She was the only resort. So we're very appreciative of her doing that. Any other questions for TACLD? Did I beat the alarm? Thank y'all.
Thank you. All right, next is just agenda items, which will be put into play, a couple of carryovers. The next meeting is going to be, I believe, October 20th. And did we decide on January 26th? Yes. January 26th. All right. Are there any?
I just did want to say that this room, technology in this room is very challenging because it hasn't been updated since like 1998 probably. The Barbara Jordan, the new building, the fancy glass one across the mall. And if y'all haven't had a chance, for so long this building just had a big dust bowl in front of it. And now there's that lovely mall area. So if you have a chance afterwards, walk down it because it's very nice. But the point I'm trying to make here is that we are going to try to see if we can get a room with similar size in the Barbara Jordan Conference Center, because I think for Steve and the recording and all of that, the Wi-Fi is probably more reliable. There are a number of reasons why it might be a better venue. So we will let you know if we end up there so that you don't go to the wrong spot and wonder where we all are. We will let you know.
Okay. Finally, is there any listed public speakers? Apparently not. Is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second? All those in favor say aye.
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 Motion carries. Well, that's gonna be a real pain in the ass if they change that to homicide. I mean, I just, at the meeting, TCDLS